Hey, welcome in the Tools on Tech studio. Today I'm here with Ramses Oudt, the community manager of Logseq. How about you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Bas, for having me. My name is Ramses Oudt. I'm also from the Netherlands, like Bas, and I am community manager at Logseq for the past 14 months. So I've interacted a lot with the community. I've interacted a lot with Bas, and today we want to talk a little bit free form about the future of Logseq, the future of knowledge work in general, talk a little bit about other tools, talk about where we see Logseq grow in the future. And yeah, we received a lot of questions from the community. So we want to dive into those today as well. And I think the first question was actually, so we'll just dive in because we got a ton of questions about the future overall of Logseq, the unique place of Logseq in the tools for thought space, how we plan to enable stuff like real-time collaboration. But maybe we can get started with the overall vision of Logseq. I almost feel like I'm taking over now.
Oh, no, that sounds good. Yeah, because where is it heading is like one of the questions a lot of people have. It's like a question that I have as well. One of the reasons I have it, of course, is like I make a lot of content, and I kind of hope that I'll get like a large subscriber base, like every YouTuber. They won't say it, but they will. And of course, like if Logseq grows, that also means that there's more people to like enjoy my content, and I'm helping more people basically by every video I make. But it's yeah, like a weird balance that we're working on. Because at one end, as an engineer, I love the way that Logseq is a bit technical because I'm right at home, and I like the fact that it's in Markdown and that I got all the control and I can read the code. But all those elements that make Logseq the perfect tool for me as an engineer make it, well, they don't add towards the value to me as an end user. If I look at it from, I have to explain this to my mother kind of thing, then she doesn't care that it's open source, that it's Markdown. Yes. She cares that she can find the information that she's searching for. And one of the questions that we have there, that I have, is like, how is Logseq looking to the future? Are you going to aim at strictly engineers, or are you going to try to broaden the scope and drag in more people?
Yeah, so it's basically always the balance between catering to a very technical audience and catering to a more mainstream audience, right? Because you have tools that are very polished. Maybe Notion comes to mind. Tana also comes to mind, even though it's obviously a very new tool, but it's browser-based. It's almost set it and forget. Whereas with Logseq, you have to install it locally. You have to pick a folder, which already could intimidate some people, right?
Yeah, because I mentioned that one online at some point, that to get people to start using a Logseq, you want to get that bar as low as possible. And the fact that they have to pick a local directory is something where you see that a lot of the less technical end users don't have a frame of reference. They're used to cloud applications where you don't have to think. You make an account, you log in, and it works. And that's the frame of reference. And then the closest thing they might get is like Office applications where you save it in a document. But then with Logseq and other tools like Obsidian, they use like a whole directory structure. So you have to pick a directory. And I see people struggle there. That's a place where I, as a content creator, get questions going like, I'm trying to install this app. Where do I start? And I think one of the possible solutions for that is that, for example, I know games do it. I know a lot of other apps do it. Most operating systems have like a fixed place where they store their configuration file. And maybe Logseq should try to use those by default and give people the option to open a different directory if they want to.
Yes. This is actually something we've talked a lot about also for the mobile app, because obviously, especially on iOS, it's super specific. You have to store your graph in the Logseq folder, either on your device or in iCloud, because otherwise iOS doesn't give the rights to Logseq to actually write the files to the system. Try to explain this to a mainstream user, right? Because they're like, oh, I've saved it in a folder. Why do I need to save it in this particular folder? So obviously there are things that we can make easier, but storing files locally, that is basically our bread and butter. That is the core idea of Logseq, is to have your data locally. And that, I think, will never disappear. On the other hand, obviously, we can help users, like you said, pick a folder for them. And that is something that I think we've already created a little bit in the mobile experience. There's obviously still a lot to improve there, but that is something definitely the onboarding experience for the more mainstream user. We really want to optimize. So we now have a designer for the past year, Jacob, who's been doing a lot of research, a lot of user interviews, and now we also have more senior developers who also focus more on the user experience on the front end, and that is a major point of attention, I would say. So personally as well, I believe that if we want Logseq to become sustainable for the long term, we need to cater to the more mainstream user who wants more, how do you say it, more ease of use, and then is also willing to pay for the ease of use. Just like we talked a little bit about Apple before, but you can say a lot about Apple, but if it works, it's like everything works. You don't have to think too much. You don't have to think about command line things, even though you could do that. And I think that is also an example for us that for the most users, you shield the technical details, but then for the people who do want to have access to those more inner parts of Logseq to tune it to their wants, we also want to enable that. So maybe we'll work harder to hide some of the technical things and make it easier to for mainstream users to just start and get going.
Yeah, that reminds me a bit about the struggle Ubuntu had when it came to the scene. Because when Ubuntu as a Linux distro came, and they've been made fun of this over time, of course, because the community was very engineer driven and not very user friendly. So if you asked questions, you basically got booed down. And then Ubuntu came on the scene, and Ubuntu said, like, we want to make this user friendly. So the front end is user friendly. But you did saw that there was like a little pushback, and one of their greatest achievements when they were doing that was that they had a code of conduct. So they said like, hey, we don't care about how technical you are, how well skilled you are and stuff. If people ask questions on our forum, they're to be treated with respect, even if it's a basic question. Not everybody's on your level. And that changed the whole thing. And of course, people still make fun of people here that I use Ubuntu. They go like, oh, you probably don't know Linux very well because you're using Ubuntu. So like, I'm using Ubuntu because I don't want to think about these things. I can build Linux from scratch as an engineer. I don't want to. That would take me months and wouldn't add any benefit to me just popping in an Ubuntu CD, waiting 5 minutes and getting done. And I think I want the same thing for Logseq, where if I would install the application fresh, I want to be able to get going as quickly as possible, but I want that option as an engineer to go dig through the text files. And I think I had like an example where I did that last. They changed the URL, the company I'm currently working for their wiki. So there was one change to the URL everywhere. And every time I clicked in my notes on a link, I got told like, this link doesn't work because they removed the redirection as well, which I think is a bad move. But okay, that's like, you know, we'll save $10 by removing the redirect and then let the rest of the company figure it out, costing hundreds of man hours. I fixed it by just going to my markdown files, running a Z script and doing a find replace over all my files, replacing that URL everywhere. 5-minute job, fixed in my whole Logseq node sets. And that's the thing that I like about Logseq. I can go into the nitty gritty of it, basically, make my hands dirty a little, but then do things that are power user moves that would be hard to explain to like a basic end user that doesn't code for a living. But I can still help them because I can also, if they are stuck with that problem and they're on a forum, I can say like, hey, just run this command and it will fix your problem. They don't know how the magic works, but their problem is solved. And I think as a community, we can help people in that way because there's different levels from those same people that are not technical. You get like a lot of knowledge about how to store information, how to find information, how to do research, because we're not all versed just as well. I mean, I can do a regular expression just fine, but if I have to write a 10-page document and make it look or be sensible, that's where I fall. This is also why I don't script my videos, but I just use outlines, because if I try to script it, I take 5 days to make a script, and then it's still horrible. I'm not a writer.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody has different skills that they bring to the table, right? So for you as a user, you're very comfortable with the more technical aspect, but then the workflow aspect maybe can be something that you want to grow still, right?
Yeah.
That you want to see, that you want to figure out, oh, could I use Logseq for maybe long form writing, or how could I make a script work for me? Whereas other users maybe already have that, but then they come to Logseq, they think, oh, I'm going to just write, and then at some point they have to maybe change some things. And I think this is where this is why I love also to be in the community, because there's such a diversity of knowledge, I would say, that people bring to the table. Obviously, the challenge also, apart from us educating users on how to use Logseq, basically the 20% of the features that give you 80% of the output, we want to teach that, but then also we want to better enable our community to find the answers to their questions. So maybe we can also segue a little bit into that, how we see our collaboration with the community on one hand, and then obviously we as a team, because we have a team with paid contributors who work full time on creating this tool, even though it's a free and open source project. Let's see. Yeah. So I think talking also about that, like trying to appeal to a broader, more mainstream audience, I think the first step that we really need to take is to obviously streamline the app a bit more, because now obviously also it being open source, everybody being able to contribute, you don't get necessarily all the features fit perfectly together. It's not that we had a product manager think through all the features, make sure that they all properly integrate. It's more, we see a challenge, or somebody in the community sees a challenge, write some code, ask it to be merged into the core app, and then what? Maybe the documentation is missing. Maybe it's not clear how to actually use the feature. So that is something where I think definitely there's a lot of room for improvement, and to document basically the best practices so that a mainstream user, even just with the app as it is now, the mainstream user can already see, I want to write an article, or I want to do some research for work. What are maybe templates that you can use, or what are steps that you can go through? What features in Logseq would you want to use for this? So for example, you're doing research, where do you put your notes? Go to the journals page. Once you've written some notes, how do you find them back? Oh, we explain a bit about linking. We explain a bit about search, about linked references, maybe even queries. Although there we need to do a lot of work to make it really useful to non-technical users.
Though the simple queries helped a lot. I remember when I started with Logseq, we didn't have the simple queries. I made a video about advanced queries because I dove deep. And then the irony was that after I made the video, I've been using simple queries for nearly everything. Yeah. So I don't train that muscle a lot. But it's still text, and it has benefits. One of the things that I dislike from a lot of the drag and drop kind of tools is that it's very hard to share something. If I write a query and I say, this is a smart query, I can just copy paste that and tweet it to someone basically, and they can use it almost verbatim. Yeah. That doesn't work if I build a filter in Notion, because I can't copy that filter as a piece of text that I can send to somebody else. And I think that's one of the things that I hope that we won't lose, where we make a query with like a graphical thing, but I can still say like, okay, what is that in code, so I can send it to another one, or teach people by saying like, here's the query, and then this is what I did to build it, but they can also just take those queries and use them verbatim, because that saves a lot of time. And it's something that I think is getting lost in the shuffle right now. You see it with a lot of the no-code solutions. As an engineer / code developer, I look at a lot of these things and go, like, oh, that's adorable. We had those problems 15 years ago. You're going to hit X, Y, and Z. And if people ask like X, Y, and Z, I'm like, how do you upgrade that cool template that you built? There's no upgrade path for a lot of these things. They're going to hit that soon, and I'm half looking forward to it because it's going to go in. It's going to be an interesting train wreck, but it's also going to mean that the market's going to change and grow because it's a step that they have to go through. And I love to see that, but also within Logseq, of course, I'm personally invested in go like, I want us to avoid that, and by having like a path. You also talking about like we have to learn Logseq when you get in there. And I think one of the best ways to learn is to know that if you make a mistake, that the pain you get from that is low. So for example, if I'm linking to words like I did in the beginning, I was just linking left and right and I didn't care about it too much. And it still happens because my scatterbrain gets then at a point where I have 6 pages that all are different variations of the same type of object. And then I have to merge those together. And I think those kind of experience, like, hey, I made a mistake and I want to merge this together, should be very streamlined because they allow someone to look at it like, oh, if I make a mistake, Logseq will help me fix that mistake. And the moment that I try to fix one of those mistakes and I have to grab towards the markdown files, then, okay, it will work for me. But at that point, my other alarm bell goes off, and that means it doesn't work for the average user that's not technical.
Yeah. Yeah, and so far, obviously, as you mentioned, we have the community and maybe you can share a query, but then many people still don't know how the query actually works. So I've written some documentation about it, but people are not going to read through 10 pages about, filters and Boolean logic. People are not interested in that. They think, I have notes. I know I have notes, and I just want to create an overview of those notes. I want to only see the relevant notes to me. And I think that is where we definitely have a huge step to take. And also to address the query thing, I always have to think of SPSS, IBM SPSS. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or used it.
I think I heard you talk about it before.
So it's a statistical program where through point and click, you can clean up data, you can create statistical analyses, but every action that you take by clicking together a report results in a script. And similarly, we are already working on a more visual query builder where basically you drag and drop filters and values, and then it turns it basically into a code. So you will still have the query code, but you do not actually need to write the code. You can just click and drag it together. And then if you want to share that query, you can just copy paste the code, and you can put it on a forum or in Discord, or hopefully at some point we'll have a template or query library that it's very easy to download maybe a query to do something for you. So I can think of very standard pieces of information in Logseq that are the same regardless of how you structure your graph. Namely, journals pages are a standard data structure. With that also dates, to-dos, those are all basic building blocks that regardless of what other links or filters or whatever you use, you can say, I want to see all overdue to-dos from the last 7 days, regardless of how you've set up your graph. So that is something either we want to make sure that it's already in the tool that you can say, maybe use the command menu and say predefined query or whatever, and that you can import it, and that you can still go into the code if you want, or use the visual editor. So regardless of how you want to work with the data, it's still the same data. It's not that it's not either or. It's you can use both. So that is basically where we want to go, where Logseq is very friendly for the mainstream user, but once they feel more comfortable, that they can peek under the hood and really shape the app how they want it to be. Let's grab the questions, because we just talked about the high level future of Logseq, how we want to make it easier for mainstream users.
Everyone.
Everyone. Everyone should use Logseq. I think that's an illusion that everybody will use Logseq.
I've known people that say that they don't make any notes, basically no recording at all. I'm going, how do you live?
Yeah.
But they are out there, and I don't think we'll ever be able to sell them on Logseq
Yeah.
or any other note-taking app. But
I think this is a bigger topic. Also off camera, we talked a little bit about this, how serious people take knowledge work. Some people, I think like us, we take knowledge work very seriously. We see it as a skill that you can get better at. And then there are people who just show up to put in their time in the office. They write in Word, they use the tools that the company prescribes them, and then they can never find their notes. For example, they're scrambling. Whereas we are maybe the complete opposite, where we're a little bit obsessed, a little bit much obsessed about the tools. How do you see that?
I think that the obsession in our case isn't so much the tools, but mostly the amount of note taking. So we try to record everything. And I'm thinking with like the S curve that goes like when you start, you make like no notes, and then in the middle you take like a whole bunch of notes, and in the end you take no notes. And it feels a bit to me like when you're doing this personal knowledge management that I started taking a lot of notes in the middle. And then as you get more proficient with it, you start taking less notes because you start realizing which notes are actually valuable and which ones aren't. I think one of the main differences I spotted there is that I used to take really outline-ish notes, like just outlining my things, which is, of course, the natural tendency when you start with Logseq because it's an outliner. But then I discovered that if I'm 2-3 months in, I have no idea what I was thinking when I was making these outlines, and there's way too little information. So then I escalated to the other side where you make like a whole bunch of notes, and then you discover that you don't use half of them. They take a lot of time, and you have to read through them. And they were very much based around what's actually there. Stopped doing that. And then I got to the point where now, for example, if I take a book, I don't highlight 1,500 pages. Now I read a chapter and then go to Logseq and say like, what's in my head? What's the takeaway? What's my thoughts on it? Because that's the only valuable thing. I can always reread the book. And I'm guessing that in the PKM sphere in itself, people are all going through like a version of that. And I also think that part of that version is that at some point they take it very seriously, and at another point they go like, well, it helps. But just the tool is not enough to get you to the end point.
No, and I think also we call it personal knowledge management. Some people call it building a second brain, however you want to call it. But I really feel that these tools should be an extension of your brain, but your own brain is still part of it. So too little information obviously is not good, because maybe the strands of the memory are gone from your mind. If you have too much, it's also like, how much will you use? But I think if you find that balance, that you can use your notes to trigger something that's in your mind, to just provide enough context or depth of details, I think that is something that everybody is struggling with, because everybody has different needs, right? At Logseq, we talk of archetypes. So, for example, you have students, you have writers, you have project managers, you have developers. Those are like more or less the archetypes that we see use Logseq and get the most value out of Logseq. But then obviously the question becomes, how do you use Logseq? How many notes do you take? How do you structure them? How detailed are they? How linked are they? And I think that is something that, like I say, it's not tied to the tool. It's tied to just doing knowledge work. And then I think also what you described is basically that diagram, or that graph, where you have on the one hand, you have somebody using Apple Notes, right? And then in the middle, somebody who has a super complex, convoluted system.
All linked together with Zapier.
Yeah. And then a few months later, they use Apple Notes again. And I think when I started with Logseq, I was first just putting everything on the journals page. Then I went crazy with linking and creating queries and getting super complex with plugins and external integrations. Now I'm back to just writing on the journals page. But now at least I know how to structure my notes, what to write and what not to write. And that just comes with experience. And again, that transfers to different tools.
I think there's also part of it, right? It's personal knowledge management, and I think that's something that gets underestimated. Where I see people like, why aren't you putting all these notes in like a central tool or something like this? Because when I have to put it in the central tool, I have to write for a different target audience than when I put it in my personal tool. In my personal tool, I can spend 2 paragraphs talking about how terrible my coworker was during the session, which is not something you would put like in the central notes. In the central notes, you're trying to make something that everyone can read, and also requires a lot more thinking, because if you have to make something for everyone to read or just myself, I also with personal notes, you're allowed to make a lot more mistakes, because the only person you have to blame is yourself. So you come there and I go like, those were some horrible notes, boss, from 6 months ago. But then that's me. So I can look angry at myself in the mirror and do better. And that's, of course, the growing experience that comes throughout time. I don't think anybody can start with something like this and just immediately do it right. It's something that you have to learn, and that takes a bit of time. And then you get to the part where you have to commit. And I've seen people talk about, they go like, okay, so I've written 2 days of journals, and I've added links to it. Where does the value come? And it's like, no, that comes once you start looking into your notes before you start Googling it. Because I think that was the main pivot point in my set, where I'm going like, I probably have a note on this instead of I'll Google it. That point does not come in 2 days. That point comes after 6 months. Or
it needs to reach a critical mass. And then obviously also, as you navigate your notes, you also discover how can you best structure your notes. Because if you notice, oh, I know I have this note, but I cannot find it back. And obviously we can talk about search and Logseq and how to find notes. We get a lot of questions, people asking, oh, when are you going to add AI to make it easier to search through your notes? Obviously, those are things we're thinking about, but ultimately, it's a very personal process that you go through. You can let AI loose on your notes. Obviously, there's also the privacy concern, I would argue. But let's say you do not have that privacy concern, you just want to see what's in your notes. I think there's a lot of value of going through your notes, working with it long term, figuring out how to best use a system. And Logseq, there is a best way to use Logseq, obviously, because it's an outliner, it's a graph tool, so it works based on links. And those are some fundamental principles. But then using those principles, you can build any workflow that makes sense to you, as long as it's linked and the information is somehow associated, be it an outline or just be it links, be it blog references, whatever. And I think that is something that I also hope, looking from a community perspective, and again, also to tie this back to the archetypes, I hope that we can make it more explicit how different people work with Logseq. And then maybe abstract away a little bit how a writer would generally use Logseq, or how a project manager would generally use Logseq, or maybe a developer to dive into a new framework or a library, or even a new programming language. How can you start making sense of this new domain you're entering? So something we're also talking about internally is, what is our vision for Logseq for the next 5 years? And we really see it as becoming a personal knowledge browser where you can put in a lot of information. We give you the tools to help you structure that information. Maybe AI at some point, but obviously the privacy aspect needs to be safeguarded. So it has to be local only AI. No data should be able to leave your system. That is one of our principles. And then showcase how can you use this. But I feel like everybody is trying to figure this out. There's this knowledge, this information explosion, this knowledge explosion. We're in the information age, but I don't feel that everybody is aware that we're living in the information age. Just like maybe in the industrial age, as factories started to get built and production pipelines went from people being there to more and more taken over by machines. As you were living through it, maybe you didn't notice, oh, we're living in the industrial revolution. Just the same way that maybe now it's not that obvious we're living in an information revolution. Or yeah, so I feel like there's a lot of learning to do. Logseq has to to get shaped in a way that most users find logical.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of learning still to happen. Us as a company and users who want to use Logseq.
I think so as well, because I just grown like the hypothesis that the whole pandemic kind of spurred this on. Like before the pandemic, everybody was sitting in the office. So if you missed something, it was easy to turn around and tap a coworker and ask like, hey, what is this? And during the pandemic, we no longer had that option. Well, we could, but then you had to start a call, you had to do a chat, wait for answers. So making your own notes and having the answers in a system of yourself became more essential. Because what we see now is that everything seems to be growing much rapidly than a couple of years ago. I mean, it was also the last pillar I was missing. So I remember that I was going like, okay, I got my tasks down, I got my calendar down, I got my communication down. Where the hell do I keep my notes? And back in that day, I found Notion, which I was totally mesmerized by at the time. So everything went into that. I basically exported my workflowy, Evernote, whatever I also had, just chucked it into Notion. Good luck. It doesn't work that way. I mean, I rarely went to those notes because the search doesn't help you enough to find those unstructured notes. And then at some point, Rome came onto the scene and everybody was using it, but I was going like, you know, I'm happy in the bubble that I'm in. Why is this so great? And then only when I at some point heard about Logseq, I was like, oh, it's open source, I have to try this. And I went in there and go like, this changes everything again. Like I had like the same thing where I'm going like, this is what I need. Like I don't want to think about where to put my notes, as in which page, but I want to be able to go like, today I'm writing this down. And then worst case, if somebody asks like, what did you do last week on Tuesday? Then you can at least go to that day. And then you have to figure out how to link it, and that's then this practice thing. Though I always think that I'm always imagining that scene that at some point, like the cops come to your door and say, like, you know, where were you on that? And you go like, I use Logseq. Like I've been preparing for this my whole life. You can just give them a whole rundown on how your day went.
But that feels almost like I feel sometimes like that when I had a meeting and then someone refers to the meeting. It's like, oh, I can't remember. It's like, I have everything. And I just pull up the notes. It's like, hey, you just searched on my name. How did you know? It's like, oh, I tagged you. And now I can find all the notes that are related or things that you said. And people are like, this is awesome. It's also a little bit scary because how much you keep track of things. Yeah. But then I'm thinking, because of the ease of adding stuff in the case of Logseq, it doesn't matter. But I want to jump also onto your point about discovering Notion and then doing a big bang of. I assume it was a big bang that you discovered Notion and you thought this is changing everything, and then you basically did in one big go. You started to transfer your thing. How did it go for you?
Well, of course, there's like this first, I don't think it was that long, but maybe like a month or a couple of weeks where I'm saying like, okay, is this it? Is this something that solves my note-taking problem? Spoiler, no, because note-taking is more than just a tool. You also need to have the skill set for it. But after a couple of weeks, it was also like, okay, if I don't put all the knowledge that I have into one tool, then I still have to search in 5 tools to find something, meaning that I'll do it less and less and less and less over time. So I made the choice, and I'm an engineer, that I'll just export everything and I'll import it all into Notion. And then if I need something, I search it. So in the beginning, of course, I would refer by searching in Notion to notes and then move them towards the rest of the Notion structure. And that worked, but as I said, the search doesn't help you enough because the things that were in there were not linked. So there was no way for things to pop up. And I think that's the main difference between a hierarchy structured system, like a paged wiki-based setup like Notion uses, and a link system like Logseq, Obsidian, Rome do, where I mark things not because that's the tag I'm going to search for. I mark them because I know at some point I need to work with that tag, and then I need to know where those notes were made. Yeah. And this helps me tremendously with my job, for example, where I have 20 meetings where we talk about something. Everybody discusses left and right. It's about different topics because they all mix it together. And with Logseq, I make notes and I link all the individual comments to the different topics that I'm working on. Yeah. And then when I have to work on those topics and I have to collect the information, all I do is I just go to that specific tag. It's usually in a hierarchy in my case. Yeah. Click on it, look at the references, and I get all the information that I need. And the prime example, like I think a couple of weeks back, I had to write a document. And it was just the proposed solution. And they said, like, no, we don't need just the proposed solution. You also need to explain why the other solutions didn't work, because we need the full picture. That normally would have been a dramatic thing. And to me, it was like, okay, fine. Then I'll open that tag that I used to collect all this information and just collect the things from there that didn't work and why I said they didn't work, because I made notes. Yeah. Took me half an hour and then like all the details were there. Yeah. And that's the point where you want anybody that uses any of these tools to get, right? To get to the point that this has been saving me a ton of work, but they won't get to that in the first week.
Yeah, or maybe even the first 6 months. I've spoken to people, like I used to be in the Rome community before, and I know several people who after 3 years are still daily users of Rome. And they say it took several years to get to the critical mass of my notes surprising me. Yeah. Basically becoming a serendipity device almost. But I think you mentioned something very important that people, especially now in the age of AI, tend to forget, is the value of having knowledge about your notes in your brain. So you linked to a term or a person or a project, and you did that with your own hands. Yeah. You were very conscious about it. So you know that there is a link somewhere. Whereas if you just type, or what some people do, they take in, they ingest information wholesale into their PKM system. They just have some kind of API, Zapier, that pushes all of their Readwise articles. Or maybe they have the Readwise integration where all their highlights end up in their second brain, but it's not useful because they have not wrestled with that information. They've not turned it into knowledge, or they've not wrestled with it that it became an insight. And I feel that no matter where we'll get with AI, there's a lot of value in just taking notes, structuring them. Could be minimally, because we also talked about off camera how you went from creating pages for everything to just creating all your notes on the journals page, and then using the outline structure and some links. That's basically how you structure your notes, right? But it's super low effort.
It is, and I very often I use something for which I consider just-in-time note-taking. So I make a lot of notes by default because I have thoughts. I make notes on my thoughts. But when I'm processing things, like things that come from Readwise, things that come from books, I either just write down my thoughts on that point in time, and then I link them towards that book or article so that I know which ones are fitted together. But I'm mostly writing down my thoughts on it. So I wrestled with the thing, and then I write down that specific part, because that's the valuable information. And that's also that you need to wrestle with that information. And that's one of the things that I noticed when I was doing a lot of highlighting, using Readwise, for example, to sync my highlights back to. I get this tsunami of information. Yeah. And they don't add as much value as I would have hoped. They do add value if you get time to process them, but you still need to do something with the information that you've collected. Because if you don't get time to think. I'm currently reading a book called Stolen Focus, Very interesting. Talks about like all this information that's happening and how it's not helping. And at some point he talked, and I thought that was an interesting thought about it, that when you read a book, because it's low information density, you have time to wrestle with the subject, to think about it, to process it. And we start living into a world where this becomes shorter and shorter and shorter. And if you then look at things like, I think short form and Blinkist, they do it. Yeah. They summarize a book. Sure, you get the core points, but you don't have the time to let your mind wrestle with the core points.
I think that's very interesting. It also reminds me of people who still use paper notebooks. So even though they are like digital knowledge workers where all of their output is digital, their ideation maybe starts on paper, like bullet journaling is an example, right? My girlfriend as well, she spent so much time behind the computer that at some point she was like, I do not have space to think. So I need to make part of my workflow analog. So I create that space for myself to think without distractions. And then once I've given something thought, then I've made sense of this information and maybe turned it into an insight, then I'm going to turn it into something that could be used by either her future self or somebody else, right? And the future self also is basically another person, because like you said, half a year later, you often don't know what you wrote. So it's key that you write your notes in a way that you can later still understand them.
I sometimes even do that on purpose, as I call it a Hemingway bridge. So when it's Friday and I have to stop the work week, I write a note to my Monday self, basically. And it's so funny because you basically start your workday on Monday, and there's this personal note from yourself, your past self, to your current self. And it has the factual information. Hey, I was working on X, Y, Z. You have to double check this and this. Probably a couple of links to a few things that are related. But I also tend to add like a personal touch to it. So like, hey, you can do it. This work is going to be the best. Or I add an animated GIF to it, so I get to smile again on Monday. And that works. This is totally weird, but you're talking towards yourself, but because there's a time frame between it, it feels like a different person. And it was a different person, because that other person had like an excellent weekend and spent time outside and had new thoughts. It's also one of the things that I found like a query online, which is one of the reasons I like swapping queries with Logseq, where I now have a set that it looks at my journal from a year ago, the same day. So anytime I open my journal, and now because I've been using Logseq long enough, it shows me then last year on the same day and the year before on the same day. Now, two years back, no, very infrequently, because I didn't use Logseq then. But I did basically started rolling into seeing my Logseq usage increase again, because I get a couple of trying Logseq again. It says then like from a year ago, and then the next day you see like a bit more text, and then a bit more text. And now I'm my past self from a year ago is frequently using Logseq, and I can see the notes coming by and going like, oh, that was what I was doing a year ago.
Like the compounding effect you're starting to notice.
To also see thoughts that I had. And in a way, that also means that if I have a thought now, there's a good chance that my future self will see it in a year, the same thought.
Which also motivates you to actually write, because there's nothing more discouraging than knowing you write something and it's very unlikely you will use it in the future. And then I've had that with courses. I was doing courses, and then halfway through the course, I was like, I'm never going to use this because I've already internalized what's useful for me. And I'm taking all these super detailed notes, but I will never use them because it's already internalized. So it's always a trade-off, right? Like, again, to how detailed are you? How much are you going to use? Are you going to do just-in-case note-taking or just-in-time note-taking? Yeah.
One of the things that I love about the just-in-time note-taking, is also that I grow my notes over time. So if I have a problem that I'm trying to figure out, prime example is Resolve, my video editor. I figure something out, I find the videos, I make a few notes on it, tag them as Resolve. And then these days I know that often the quickest way to get something done is to check my notes, because those one only show the useful information for me, collected, and just a few things that I know that I need. The rest, all the things that I could figure out on my own, I don't write down. I just write down the things that weren't intuitive to me. Saves me time reading, and the rest I could usually figure out. And if I can't figure it out the second time, because we all get older, we forget stuff, or things that were logic a year ago might not be logic now. And then I keep updating these notes, so they just become better and better over time, because they are built on experience and not on a hunch.
Yeah, I think that is a super important takeaway. Also for people who start just with note taking, the first instinct is to write down everything, and then yeah, I think you said this before. We're starting to talk in a circle. That like you either take too much or too little, and at some point you find basically what is the balance. But it has to come from experience. So, Bas, we've been talking quite a bit about Logseq. It's not the only tool on the market, shockingly enough.
Yeah.
How and I will also share my experience, but I'm first curious, like how do you decide what tool to use? So, Logseq is a very important tool in your toolkit, in your knowledge work toolkit. But I guess you also use other tools. How do you decide what tool to use, and how do you maybe avoid just doing everything with one tool for the sake of doing everything with one tool? Like what is the balance? I think you have the most experience with that. I'm a bit too biased, I would feel.
Well, yeah, I mentioned that on the channel as well. I use Todoist, Notion, and Logseq together as a combination set of tools. I've used a lot of Obsidian in the past, and Obsidian and Logseq, of course, is like easier to mix and match. Pardon. Because Markdown, you can switch to Markdowns, and then that works, except for things like block references. And since I'm using a lot of block references, that path is slowly but surely closing off for me. Like if I open my Logseq nodes in Obsidian, it looks like a whole bunch of user long IDs that point to somewhere else that Obsidian has no idea what to do with. But the tools, I'm very focused on a tool to use it for its strength. I would say, for example, I don't take quick thoughts with Logseq. I take them with Todoist, because Todoist has a quick add. I know that it always works. I open my phone, I click a button, type it in, hit send. It will take care of itself. It's 100% reliable. Logseq has a feature for that, but it's I first need to open Logseq, make sure it's synced, then add the notes.
20 seconds before it's synced.
Yeah, that 20 seconds is way too long for those kind of short burps. So that still goes for my Todoist. But I also noticed then, things grow over time. I'm doing more and more task lists inside Logseq. But I do like the focusedness of something like Todoist. So in that case, I don't want to be distracted by my own notes, so to speak. And there's like a whole set of built-in biases. I've been using Todoist for 1.5 decades now, I think. That's a long time to use an app. And I use it for everything that I have work to do. So my brain just looks at that app and goes like, that's what I need to do. Just start on the top, go down. Other things where I use, for example, Notion is very often used. We did as well for sharing information. So when I have to work with people together. So that's like when you hit like a weakness in an application, I have two options. I either try to work around it or I pick a different application. I get asked as a content creator all the time, hey, you want to try my new app? You know that as well. Did I actually ask you to use other apps? Because I think that would be kind of bold statement, considering you work for Logseq.
Well, I use other apps, obviously, because I believe in using the right tool for the job. I have a very corporate background where I tried out a lot of tools, and like the companies where I worked they always had this philosophy of best of breed. So we don't care if the tools don't integrate, we'll make them integrate, because for this part of our process or workflow, we want to just use the best tool for the job. Obviously, then the other side is the all-in-one tools in corporate environments. Could be Oracle or SAP. Makes things very complex. You don't have best of breed anymore. So personally, I don't believe in that approach, doing everything with one tool. Notion or Tana, like they market themselves as an everything operating system. I think that's it's false marketing. I think it's impossible, because if you if you do that, you cannot do everything well. You will do maybe some things well and some things scrap. And same way with Logseq, we're unapologetically an outliner. And then people ask, how do I write long form documents? I say, you don't. You can do it with Logseq, but then exporting out of Logseq, formatting it, creating a linear document out of it, it's much better done in either a dedicated writing program or Google Docs is what we use a lot. Also because we don't have collaboration features yet in Logseq, which are going to come. They are going to come, but they don't exist yet. So why would we pain ourselves collaborating using a tool that's not made for it, just so we can use the tool? It doesn't make sense, not even for us as a team. So I really believe in taking a good look at your workflows. That's why I believe in actually doing your workflows and let it cost pain for the time being. You just need to get used to something. You need to get a result, right? So you're a knowledge worker, maybe you're in a new role, you have new output you need to create. You first need to figure out, how do I get to that output, right? Yeah. And then later you can start to optimize. You can start to think, how do I get there the quickest? How can I skip steps? Yeah. And I've noticed when I just started out with Logseq and I was writing a newsletter about Logseq with Logseq, I was doing everything with the tool. And then I noticed with the last two steps, namely actually writing the long form part and then getting it into the newsletter tool, it was just taking too much time. Yeah. So I did that for 2-3 months. Notice these last two steps are just too much pain for me to do this way. I started writing it immediately in a newsletter platform. And at first I was like afraid that, because I don't trust cloud apps. Mm-hmm. So I was afraid, something might happen and I might lose a newsletter. Has never happened. So I'm not afraid of that, but I had to obviously experience first that pain and then look for the best tool for the job. And I think everybody should have that mindset and also start from a place that you already know. So for example, Logseq has a to-do functionality features. But if you already use Todoist and you have no reason to switch, why would you switch? I see too many people ask, how do I implement this very specific workflow I have in app A in Logseq? And then I ask, why would you do that? Do you experience problems with your current workflow? And they say, no, I just want everything in Logseq. And I ask, what is the advantage of that? And they cannot really name it because they have not experienced the pain point. Yeah. They just think, because they see other people do it, they think they have to do the same. And I don't believe in that. And again, that's also why I think we should learn from each other. So if I meet other community managers who are also writing content or creating a newsletter, I want to hear from them what their process is. They might use completely different tools, but if I can see what their steps are, like they collect maybe resources or they collect questions or ideas in an outline, then they turn that outline into a longer piece. Maybe they gather some feedback. Like, how do they do that now? And I can learn from that. And I also learn from my own experience, but I cannot just discover an app and then say, I'm going to do everything with this.
No, I don't think that's the best approach. It's obvious, of course, when you have like a specialized app. I see people doing invoicing in Notion, for example, and I'm going like, why? Like, there's a lot of boring text stuff that you need to take into account. Yeah. You're suddenly doing all that work yourself, and there's perfectly fine applications out there that will do the whole work for you. Make sure, and one button, send it to your account and stuff. Yeah. For $10 to $15 a month. And if you're a corporate person, that's $15 well spent. Like if I spent like 2 hours trying to figure out my invoices, that's not a good time investment. I much rather spend 2 hours making more content. So those ones are easy. Then of course you have your workflow, but then we get of course to the in like the working together my English is lacking here. Using like APIs.
Interoperability?
Yeah, I think that's This is two Dutch people trying to learn English. Welcome to the show. So that is like my one thing that I would love to have like in Logseq. I was very excited when we got like the API because I can make.com do stuff. But what my real wish was to be is that, like, for example, when I make my video script, that's a page with a lot of properties that I could just hit a button and say, like, send those properties and all the things that I put under it to Notion, so that I don't have to open Notion. Because there's multiple places where I need to keep stuff. I already have a plugin for Todoist. And I'm also wondering, like, how does that future look? Because me, as a professional that works in enterprise environments, I make, like, a lot of notes. And that's super for me because I can find all that stuff, but I have coworkers and I have a boss that then goes like, hey, but I want you to have that information in Jira or in Azure Boards or somewhere else where the company can read it and we know that the information is there. And how's the future look on that type of connection? Because I think that is one of the steps that are needed to become like more of an enterprise level application, or are you not aiming for that within Logseq?
I'm not sure if we would aim to be an enterprise level application. We are fleshing out our vision. So just like we have archetypes, we're also fleshing out our vision, looking at what are the needs of an individual user, what are the needs of a team, and we even have an audacious goal of helping humanity as a whole. So our big, hairy, audacious goal is we want basically to become a decentralized Wikipedia, where you have access to public graphs that are searchable. You can use information from it. You can comment on information. So basically you get decentralized but peer-reviewed information. That is our big, hairy, audacious goal. Then obviously the question becomes, how do you get there? So we're now a local single player tool, right? Yeah. So even though you can sync your notes to other devices, you cannot give other people access to your notes unless you give your graph password. But then people have access to your entire graph.
What I currently do, I have a coworker and we both use Logseq. And we're inside a system where we don't want to sync stuff through the public, and we're not allowed to because of security reasons. So what we now do is that I export like meeting notes, for example, put them in Notepad, save them as a markdown file, and then email or MS Teams him the markdown file, and then he gets them back into Logseq. And that's of course a shame because there's two people here making excellent notes in the same tool, and they're using a roundabout way to get those notes to each other.
Yeah. And obviously in your case, you work at a bank, super high security levels. Obviously sync is not something that you would be able to use. But then, for example, maybe peer-to-peer could be an option, right? That you can say, I want to connect to this graph and I want to pull this page. So we are thinking as a team, how we can make the idea of a user something of a core building block in Logseq. So for people familiar with Rome Research, there basically every block has an owner. So you can see who created the block, who changed the block. You can even prevent people from changing blocks that are not their own. And that is also something. Obviously, we look at other tools, how they do things. Sometimes people call us copycats. I see it as learning from how other people do it, just the same way that people are learning from us. So the idea of a user, that is very high on our list of priorities. Then obviously the security architecture, I'm not a security person, so I don't know how that would be in practice. But with plain markdown files, you cannot give granular access to just a part of your graph, or maybe even part of a document. So that is also where we're making strides to build a database, basically underneath, a better database underneath Logseq that already exists. We already have a database that basically whenever you make a change in Logseq, first the database is updated and then the database updates the markdown file. Yeah. And how we want to do, or how we want to enable better collaboration, because also real-time collaboration is very high on our wish list, is to add the idea of a user, have more metadata about each block, which then also in turn will make it easier to sync on a block level. So you don't have to wait for an entire page to load via sync, because if you change one block on your mobile device and then on the same time you change something on your desktop machine, currently that leads to a sync conflict, right?
Yeah, so many.
Yeah.
I have like 5 devices, so I'm very intimately familiar with sync conflicts.
Yes.
Coming to the point where now I've learned, like anytime I do something with Logseq, I'm basically sitting there waiting until the sync is done.
Yeah.
Then I get frustrated because I have to type in my password again, which is like things that I consider growing pains. Right? There's already issues for it on GitHub. I checked. Because these are things that were growing, and me, from the standpoint as how I use Logseq, I'm like, the fact that it's local, that it's all encrypted, that the security is on point, are more important to me than having to wait that 20 seconds for the sync to come on. But you know, that's like the thing that I'm going like, and once you get these things down, then that would be really nice, because I want to think. I'm talking about a tool that I use very often because I don't have to think. If I have a thought and I'm behind my laptop and my Logseq is open, then I go to my Logseq and I go to my journal and I go to the bottom row and I just start typing. And I think still people underestimate that is more powerful than they realize. Look at something like Logseq and go like, you know, what's the use of a journal? And why would I can organize things in 1,500 pages, hierarchy, and think about every note that I make, where to put it. But that's not the same as, hey, I have a thought, let me just chuck it on my journal. And sometimes even go like, let me chuck it on my journal and I'll figure out what I'm going to do with it later, which I think I had yesterday at some point. And then I just said like, okay, and at the end of the week, I go through my journal, like I check the last week, which I can do because I can scroll down through the week and then see if there's anything I missed and go like, oh, wait, I didn't enrich that one with tags or things. So either I'm going to accept that I'm never, ever going to look at it, because it's not linked to anything, and if it's not linked, then I won't stumble over it. Or I link it now so that I can use it in the future because I thought it was useful. There's a reason I clipped it into my Logseq.
There's also this idea from How to Take Smart Notes that pops up in my mind. And Sunke Arens said, you do not save your notes, or you shouldn't save your notes where you took them. Just like when you read a book and you take notes in the margin, they're useless. You want to store them where you're likely to find them and where you expect to find them. And also this comes down to the linking. Like you can put all of your notes in Logseq. You can even write the best outlines, properly nested blocks, that everything is properly structured. But then if you don't add a link, if you don't say, this is where I will in the future expect to find this, that basically renders the whole exercise mostly useless. And this is, I think, also where we get a lot of pushback from users, where they say, oh, if you just improve search, we'll not have this problem. I'm thinking, yeah, but if you don't know what's in your graph, you also don't know what to search for. And then of course, it can be counter arguments where you say, oh, you should have AI that looks for synonyms as well of these words. I'm thinking you're making things more complicated, whereas you should involve your own brain in actually taking your notes and knowing where stuff is located and wrestling with that information.
Yes, but still, search has a way to go. I mean, Logseq on the moment, last time I checked was a month ago, so don't pin me down on this. This is how fast it goes. It doesn't make what I consider the stake test, which...
What's the stake test?
I love the stake test. I found that one on Twitter, like I find so many things. And what it means is that if you have a note for a steak recipe, and that has like in it like ingredients, steak, pepper, salt, you know, whatever, and you search, that you can say like pepper and salt, and it will find that page because it knows in that page you talked about these two subjects. And so the stake test is that you can just type a random amount of ingredients and you will always get to that page, or at least it will be somewhere. I mean, if you have like a lot of steak recipes, it might be a list.
Yeah.
And that's currently a thing that Logseq failed in, because Logseq would only see it if I wrote it in the right order. If I say salt, pepper, because that's how you wrote it down. While as long as it's separate words, you should just be able to find. So because very often when I'm searching for something, and I think that's a frustration for some people, I know which keywords I talked about, but I don't remember in which order, because who cares about that?
Of course, of course. Yeah, and I think also Logseq being an outliner, obviously the way it looks, it doesn't tend to look across blocks, right? It just looks on a block and a branch level, which again is not obvious to everybody, especially not starting out with Logseq. But then also, as you're taking notes, you don't want to have to think too much about what order you have to put information in, and then remember that order. That is basically what you say. What I hear you say, it's okay to have some kind of involvement, that you say, oh, I outline, I add links, but you don't want to have to become so precise at defining your data, or so precise at defining your search term, that your search results will be basically empty because it's just not finding it. So, I mean, I cannot go too deep into technical details because I'm not an engineer, but I do know that Junji, who is specialized in natural language processing, who is really focused on that now, on improving the search, on creating a search page so that actually when you have a lot of search results, that you maybe can filter also your search results, that fuzzy search becomes better. So there's definitely things in the pipeline to make this better, but I have no idea when it will get released, because obviously it's something that one person is working on right now, as we have a lot of other things to work on. Sync being one, real-time collaboration. Obviously, we are revising the whole UI and the UX to make it much better integrated, because now sometimes it feels like a little bit of a patch quilt. So yeah, over time, this quilt came to exist. A lot of people added code, but there's not real a coherent structure.
Yeah, then you haven't even talked about plugins yet, because sometimes I look at the interface and go like, oh yeah, it's functional, but that's about where this ends. And you know that, but that's of course part of the growing process as well. You need to get to like a common denominator on what is Logseq, how should it look, and it's a tough problem. We discussed about that earlier, where I talked about Android and the material design, where a company like Google probably invested millions, if not billions, into getting Android to be consistent. And on a, I hope, smaller scale, Logseq is dealing with the same issue, where you first started with like, hey, is the core functionality good? Is the functionality that's in it good? And then you have to go at some point like, okay, now we have the core down. We want to make it consistent. I don't think it's an impossible challenge, else you would have all probably given up by now. But it's mostly a thing where you go like, okay, but how do we get there? And definitely with external input from all these different people.
Yes, and that's also obviously always in an open source project with a team. And you said that you've used Ubuntu, and Ubuntu also has it has a community, but it also has a company with investors and product managers. I would assume we don't have a product manager. We didn't have a design system, for example, for the longest time. So now we have a designer, and we have front-end engineers who are very capable, who came in and said, where's the design system? Or where are the plugin guidelines or the components for the plugins? There are none. So we're building that now as we're maturing. And also as we see how people use Logseq, because to go a little bit into the history of Logseq, it basically started out as a web version of org mode. So Tiensen, our founder and CEO, together with 3 other team members who are still with the team, they started out as org mode users, and they wanted to use org mode on their mobile phones on the web. So that's how it started out. And then at some point, more people started to use it. people said, hey, can we sponsor you? That we invest in the company. And as I said, there's no company yet. So you had to, you had to found a company. So it's very user and community driven. And I think now we are at a crossroads where we go from mainly being community driven to being mainly team driven. Obviously, we still listen a lot to our users. We have lots of user interviews every month. Myself, but also Jacob, our designer. We spend a lot of time in conversations with users, also to shape the tool to become useful. And that's also how we came to the archetypes. And now we know the archetypes. We have people who learn with Logseq and people who manage projects with Logseq. How do we create the features that best help them? And then what should be a core feature and what should be a plugin, for example? And then you get into a whole other rabbit hole, like why are plugins not available on mobile, which is also a pain point. I do not know the technical details why it's currently not available. But again, it's also something that the team is very aware of and that we hope to find an answer to, either ourselves or maybe with community contributors, but who want to work closely with us, because the features now become so big. You cannot say to somebody, oh, can you code this in a weekend and do a pull request? Because now we actually have to make a design and we have to think about how does it fit into the bigger picture. So a lot of learning that we have to do, hopefully also with the community. Although I think we're on the right path and we're improving. We're getting better at listening to users also who just have ideas, whereas before we had users who had ideas and then were also capable of coding it themselves. Yeah. And that is getting less and less now. Now we have more people who come from more traditional tools like Notion or Roam, where they have a support team or a product team that they can email with suggestions or questions or whatever, whereas we are very much still operating as hackers, even though we're trying to change things.
It's the hardest change you have to make. Basically, Logseq is going through his adolescence phase,
Yes.
shouting against parents and stuff like that.
Yes.
And of course, like so worrisome from the community in that regards is that as Logseq goes from like a bunch of hackers that put something together and said, "This is cool." And I remember, like in the beginning, sitting in a Zoom call with the lead developers and a couple of people. These days, you can't go on a Zoom call anymore because it won't be 10 people sitting there having like a nice talk about this cool app that they're using, but it will be hundreds of people that all have questions
about how to use the app
as well.
Sometimes we do live demos of new features, like in the Discord or on a Zoom call, and there's always, when I say, "Oh, what questions do you have about this?" I get a bunch of random questions like, how do I create a theme, or how do I install a plugin? And I'm thinking, there is documentation about this, but the vibe I think that a lot of people also get, it's still from Logseq, it's a little bit hackery. It's technical people. I even get DMs from people asking me, "Hey, I'm not a programmer. Do you think I would be able to use Logseq?" I'm thinking, well, if you know how to write in a list and you know how to use the tab key, yeah, you can use Logseq. But it doesn't have that vibe yet, I think. And also when you use Logseq for the first time and you see that it's all text-based, and then you get random short codes. So for example, oh, you want to embed in tweet, and then suddenly you get curly braces and tweet. It's like, what is this? And you click away. Oh, now I see the tweet. For many people, it's very confusing. So there's a lot of room for improvement there. The question then becomes, who do we want to mostly cater to? And can we find a balance? Because we also realize that you cannot please everybody. If everybody is your audience, nobody is your audience. So we do need to have focus workflows that we want to enable. And then whatever we do not enable out of the box, we want to make the plugin ecosystem as good as possible. So both for the end users as for the plugin developers. So give plugin developers not just an API, but maybe also design assets, right? End users want documentation. So maybe we'll not accept plugins without documentation anymore, because now there's a ton of plugins that have no documentation. It's not clear how to use it, but it's still there, and it confuses people potentially. So it's a difficult trade-off.
One of the issues that I hit is like, how do you manage the different graphs? Like when you have like a work graph and a personal graph, and there's like partially interlaps. Should you just all mix it together or keep it totally separate?
Yeah, good question. I mean, personally, I do everything in one graph. So I have on my journals page, I have a heading for Logseq or for work, and a heading for personal. I know many people who have different graphs, but then obviously you're constantly switching. So one of the things we really want to tackle in the coming months to year is, and I already alluded to it, the idea of a user. So if you have this idea of a user and granular visibility or access rights, that could also mean that you can work in one graph, maybe in a collaborative graph, but still have your own little section of information that is encrypted with your own private key that nobody can touch. So that is one thing that we're exploring. From a little bit less technical viewpoint, I know people use tags to separate their work from their personal notes, and obviously we don't have page filters yet, so that you can filter out all the irrelevant stuff on a page. Personally, I would really like to have that right now, but it's not there yet. People used to roam might know what I mean. So when you have a page filter, you can say any branch or any block that has this filter, I only want to, or has this link, I only want to filter them in or filter them out. Yeah. So the same way that in Logseq the linked references work, but then on a page level. Yeah. So I think that would be the simplest implementation of this the separation between work and personal life. Then obviously we have already tackled the multi-window support, because that is actually one of the reasons we created multi-window support, that you can press Command or Control N and then open a new window, and then in that other window you open another graph. Many people work that way, but still, personally, I think you're building a second brain. So you're not building several second brains. So I believe that everything should be on one graph, and then that we as Logseq, or maybe as a community, should provide better tools to create that separation of concerns. So we have some things in the pipeline on page filters, the idea of a user. Currently, how I would recommend it really depends on how self-conscious you are about your own notes. If you want to open your graph on a big screen at work, and you're afraid that people see your own personal notes, obviously, then do it in a separate graph. But
this feels like very painful. I keep everything like in a single graph, with the notable exception of the projects that I work for, because those are 100% separate. There's no sync, and that should never happen. But like my personal graph is like full of personal stuff, but it has also tools on tech stuff, and it has work stuff, and it has stuff for Abonai, which I do. And then of course, because I like demo things, I very often am like on live streams and I'll show it in my graph. This is always an edgy case for me, because I always have to double check what do I have open right now, and if I search for something, what will show up, because not everything needs to be shown to the world. Being able to better filter that at some point would help. But this is also one of the reasons why I have a tools on tech demo graph where I just test things out. Yeah. Because if I'm making like a video, one, I want things to look as default as Logseq, and I don't want to worry about it showing projects. And I was at like, sometimes I hide notes by not giving them the full name, but like a short name.
Yeah.
So a while back, my girlfriend was standing next to me and was searching something up. She said, "Oh, you have a page on me," and I was opening the page. She goes, "What's that one?" And that's then something I was planning. It's like, that's not something you need to know.
It's a surprise.
It's a surprise.
Yeah.
And then she starts thinking like, what are the letters mean and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So I'm basically switched to using random letters now, so that there's no relationship with the.
But interesting that you say this, because when I just started as Logseq's community manager, I had grand plans where I thought, oh, I'm going to do weekly interview calls where people share their screen and they show how they use Logseq. And every time I approached somebody, they got basically an anxiety attack. They thought, oh, I will need weeks to clean up my graph and to make it presentable. And I would always say, no, just show as you use it. But everybody is afraid, because it's very personal, is afraid to show show their deepest secrets basically on the web. And that's also why, and I already mentioned it, Rome, for example. Rome has page filters. So you can say, I put everything underneath a blog, give that blog a tag or a link. And then I say in the page filter, I do not want to see this link. And then anything that is related to that link, it's in the same branch, just doesn't appear on the screen. So maybe, I don't know, in the B-roll, we can put some example in. But in Rome, you can also filter something out globally. So you can click a little globe on the page filter, and then in your entire graph, that one link will not appear. So you can, for example, if you're doing a work presentation, anything that's tagged with personal, those blocks are just invisible. So that is something that I think not enough tools have, and we definitely need something like that, especially because Logseq is a tool that it makes it so easy to just dump everything on the journals page. But then if you want to demo something and you've just been journaling your personal stuff, obviously you can collapse the branch. But it's like, I hope I don't accidentally click it.
Yeah, accidentally open it. It might have that like 2 alineas of me venting about a coworker in it.
Exactly, yes.
So yeah, that's definitely something that would help me a lot, because I of course show my my graph on a very frequent basis. Yeah. I don't care when I'm recording a video, because if I do accidentally share something, then when you do video, I just cut it out in the edit floor, and nobody ever has to know or see it. But as soon as you start doing live streaming, then it becomes a thing. And of course, as someone who's a very fanatic Logseq user, I very often have people that go like, can you show me that app that you keep raving about? And after you do that, will you stop yapping about it? Which is no. But that's... then of course, like the thing is, it goes like, okay, what can I show? What can I? And I use tricks. I've also considered just making a separate graph to put a couple of things in there that I would like to keep private. But then I'm splitting up my brain, which I don't like.
Yeah. It adds unnecessary friction. Yeah. Whereas if we would provide the tools that makes it very easy to say, I only want to see like these notes now. And I talked about the on-page filters, but something that we're also working on now is basically work environments or workspaces within Logseq. So you can say, I have a stack of blocks or pages that I want to open at once in the right sidebar, and I want on the main page another page to show. You can set it up before. So basically you can create just the same way you have on Linux or on Mac, where you can have several desktops where you can arrange your own apps. The same way we want to create a saved view in Logseq. So that could already help, where you create a view that only has relevant pages open, and then you can just show that view and you don't have to worry about other things. But obviously still, you will be able to open another page, or maybe you're searching and you do not want that to when you search live, and everything
faster as well. So you're typing in like a couple of letters, and then things show up and you quickly keep on typing. Because that's the way around it. I think I'll need to update my will as well. Like not only remove my browser history, but I'm taking my graph with me.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole bunch of information, and I think that's the awesome thing about like your personal knowledge, that I can dump everything in it. But that's also the scary part. Everything is in it. That's literally a copy of half my brain in text format, plain text to be precise, and depending on how your system is organized, maybe not even encrypted. Anybody that wants to know, mine is like disk encrypted and home drive encrypted, so good luck. But yeah, I'm an engineer. I think about that. We know, of course, that sync is encrypted, so at least that part's covered. But in a follow-up on that one, like how is it for the local drive? Are people aware that if they don't do anything, those text files, while really easy to read, are also very easy to read for anybody else that has access to your system?
Yeah, and it's difficult because we had on-disk encryption built into Logseq. It was marked as experimental, but you could enable it and then have your nodes locally encrypted. But then we ran into the problems with having encryption locally and encryption on sync, and that would cause issues. So now currently there's no built-in way to encrypt your nodes with Logseq. And for certain use cases, it really is necessary. So not just, oh, I'm having my graph open and I don't want people to see my personal stuff. It's also, I have this machine that is maybe managed by a system administrator who has potentially access to all of the files on my system. I do not want that. So how do you cover that? And I think there's definitely a lot of work that we still have to do. This is actually also something that I hope that at some point we can get more community members who are very into encryption, who are engineers, who are able to help, who can jump in. Because to give you an example, the whiteboards feature that we have built now, it's not that we build it as a team. One of the community contributors said, hey, I want to integrate TLDraw into Logseq and then have all these features. And we said, come please join us for, I don't know how long he joined us, I think for half a year. And he helped us basically get this feature started. Yeah. And now it's a very mature feature already, even though it's still in beta. And that could have never happened without him jumping in to help us when we were short on engineering hours, when we didn't have enough capacity for people to work on this. Yeah. So we have a community fund. It's pretty well filled now. I mean, we have over 60K in the community fund now. And I keep repeating this because I think not enough people are aware that we have a community fund, but it's not being actually used. We don't get proposals from people. Again, I'm also looking at myself that we need to be clear about what are our needs and where do we think the community can help. But yeah, so I'm looking in the camera. Please, everybody, if you have an idea on how to do something better in Logseq, please send me a DM or an email because we need it. And we have the resources now, the monetary resources for that. But definitely a lot of things that we still need to cover. Yeah, so why does it make sense to have to-dos in your personal knowledge management system? Like, why would you? There was another question that came in.
That's one of those, like, having to-dos in your knowledge-based system seems logical. And I think it's logical for the corporate project that I'm currently working on. I can't use Todoist or Notion, because those are cloud services and everything has to stay local and encrypted and doesn't leave the building. So I've been using, I think, MS Tasks there, or MS To Do for a while, which is nice, but very limited if you're used to something like Todoist. And over time, I started to use the To Do function in Logseq more and more. And that works. It works very well, and it's nice because if I'm in a meeting and people say like, hey, I'm doing something or waiting for someone, I can just keep typing and then I just say waiting and I immediately link it to the coworker that's doing it. So that's a good reason to have it there. But on the other end, and that's something that I notice, is when I'm walking around the house and I need to do chores or stuff around, then having a dedicated to-do list app, not just to-do list, but any app, because you can open it on your mobile phone and you just have a list of your tasks and you don't get distracted by your notes. So in that case, it becomes like better to have like a dedicated app, also because everything around it is built around getting tasks done, right? If I have to go for my to-do app and I have to check something off, I can just open the app, take the top one, do that, swipe it away, done. If I go to Logseq, even on a normal work day, what I have to do first is collect, by running a few queries, which tasks did I still have, mark them as I'm doing them, mark them as done. Maybe I even want to do time tracking, just made a video about that. But it's also very basic. It doesn't integrate very well because, well, just tracks locally, but, then, whoever you work for says like, yeah, can you put that in a timesheet? And you're still spending like half your day typing over numbers. But it's just not as tuned, and I think that comes back to what we said earlier, where like you want to use the tool that's best fit for the job.
Yeah.
And there's places where I absolutely love it. For example, if I make YouTube videos, now I have a template that I use that has like this huge checklist that I go through when I'm making tasks. Yeah. And that's basically so that I don't forget things. And that fits very nicely. So I'm just working in that page while I'm making my content, checking off the boxes. For the next video, I was even going to try doing time tracking with it, because one of my viewers said like, hey, like how much time do you actually use on the video? I said like, hey, this seems like a good moment to try the time tracking thing and actually see what costs me the most time when I'm building one of these things. So there it makes perfect sense. I'm writing stuff, I'm working stuff, it's all on the same page. But as soon as I'm not inside Logseq, all the other tools sprint ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, it's if you ask me, I believe in combining tasks and notes, especially if you're a knowledge worker and you have to take in information, make sense of it, and then like output something that is basically a mini project. So being able to combine tasks and your notes, to me, it's already very, very valuable, because also with a query, you can very quickly run a query and you say, I want to see all the tasks that I have to do to this specific project, right? But it's a lot of manual work. It's as you pointed out, it's limited in some ways. Also, when you want to gather all your to-dos in one place. So I don't know if we can put in the post edit something in the B-roll. I don't know what I can show, but we're working on a more of a dashboard, turning the journals page more into a dashboard, where you maybe have a calendar view that integrates with your the calendar app on your operating system, maybe using an API that it fetches all your appointments, all your events. But then also your to-dos, we want to make it easier to fetch all to-dos, maybe even split it out in different areas, because we've also been thinking about, coming back to the previous point, how do you keep a distinction between work and private? We're also thinking, how can we do that maybe in your tasks? Like, is there some way you can tag a task that is personal and then only show it in the little column where you have your personal tasks? Yeah. So that's something we're thinking about. Another very popular feature request is to enable people to set their own task statuses. So now, for example, you have now, later, or to do, doing, done, but you cannot change that. You cannot create your own workflow with it. So we've been thinking of enabling or creating some kind of management screen where you can set up your own little tags. So maybe something is a to do, or then you have something, a status that is researching and outlining, drafting, editing. That would be, for example, for a content creation workflow. But maybe you're working on a project and you have other
custom statuses for that project. So those are some things that we want to make the tasks more of a first class citizen. So, and we talked at the beginning already about Lego blocks, that we want to look at what is Logseq used for, and then what are the Lego blocks, what are the features that enable people to create the artifacts that they need for their specific role. So we see a lot of people not just take notes, but also work with to-dos, or have a need for a calendar view. So those are some things that we're considering adding. And yeah, I've tried so many times, so I'm just speaking for myself, but I've tried so many times to have a separate to-do list and a separate notes app, and for me it never worked, because I would always take notes, either notes in my to-do list, or I would take notes and then I would think of a to-do, and I had to find some way to link the two. So, see this page or this app for more notes about this task. It just becomes a shit show for me. So I want everything in one app. As I am thinking of something I'm working on, or if I'm in a meeting, I want to be able to create in one go to-dos, and then have a simple query that I can fetch all the to-dos that are for me. Yeah. So I think a lot is already possible, but it requires more thinking right now. And we want to take the user more by the hand and say, this is the best way to use to-dos in combination with your notes, for example. This is how you would structure them, et cetera, et cetera.
Logseq is very close, because the more I'm using the to-do sets in my work environment, the more I'm thinking, do I really need to have a separate app for it? Because it is so easy, and I can tag and filter and move things around. And I think that it's like almost there. It feels like that. For me, like the two main functions that I miss when I'm looking at Logseq is really quick capture.
Yes.
And that one would probably be an extension of quick capture of notes,
yes,
which would be the same thing. Because if I have just a button that says like you push that one, and you can either type in a note, or you can type in a note and hit another button and say this is a task.
Yeah.
Both would make my life tremendously better in me not forgetting things, with my brain always jumping around. And I think the other one is more of an aesthetic thing. I now run queries so that I know which tasks I need to do. I use the priorities a lot, A, B, C. That works, but it's not as intuitive as having like a shortened list that just goes, these are the tasks that you need to do in the order that you wanted to do them, especially on mobile. So if I can dream a little, then for me, if I open Logseq, I would get notes first, but I would have like a second screen that is just the tasks that are open. So I can just say like open Logseq, and I'm either in notes mode or tasks mode.
Yeah.
Which takes the data that's already there, but just formats it in a nice way.
It's a very good point, because that is actually also part of our vision, that we want to, much like Notion tables, right? You can have a Notion table that is a gallery view or a Kanban board, or just more of a self view like Excel, but it's still all the same data. And I think that is something we've also been thinking about now that we also have whiteboards, now that we're considering adding a long form mode to Logseq as well, that you have these different views of the same data. So, and I also alluded to it with the workspaces, for example. It would be great if you can say, oh, I now want to go into writing modes, and that you only see the tasks that are tagged with writing, for example. You only see those in the right sidebar. Or maybe you have a special workflow for one specific writing project where you have some other filters set up, that when you switch to that workspace, that you only see that. So I think that already fits in the vision. As for quick capture, I think that is one of the most heard feature requests. So I know the engineers are working on it, but I've also heard that they've been working on it for quite a while, and I don't know how much focus it has now. So, but it is coming if you're waiting for it. I just don't know when. So, yeah.
So that's one of those things where I'm like glad it's open source, because if my coding would have been better, like I'm an operations guy, not so much a developer. I dabble, but I don't develop. I would probably already scratch that itch myself, like at some point, going like, hey. And the already built-in quick share function is really nice that I can just, like, when I'm browsing on my phone and go like, oh, this is interesting, I'll just send it to Logseq. I think that the only thing there that's stopping me from using it is that currently I have to make sure that my Logseq is synced, which we all know. So, but that's one of them. Go like, okay, that's temporary. That's like, because we're still working on the sync thing. There will be a point that there will be an order in there, so that even if it's not synced, that it will go like, okay, take this, sync first, then add that, or it wouldn't matter. And I know that's what we're gonna. I think I saw the Twitter post on talking about like the EDN backend, which means that you would know in your journal which type first, which type last, and then it suddenly becomes a non-issue, right? Because if I then quickly share on my phone, the sync would know that this is different from that, and that it can just be combining those two things. And then that, I think that the thing that most people will care about is my data safe? Well, you know, won't I lose it? I think that's also the main frustration I've seen when syncing goes wrong, is that people lose part of their work. That I might have had that a couple of times as well. And it's not the end of the world, and it helps a lot when you tell people just go to the version history. Probably the last version has all your notes, and 9 out of 10 times it has. So now I know that, and I just get the latest version. But it's also going like, hey, I was promised that the sync would be better than just file sync. But I also knew going into that that's a hard problem to solve if you don't know the exact moment when text got changed.
Yeah, and that is actually also a point, and I don't know how much already talked about this. I've alluded to it, that we're working on a better database that basically keeps more metadata about each block. So in that case, it becomes much easier to say, okay, this block changed, because each block has its own change timestamp. Now a page has a change timestamp, but it's not on a block level. But once we have that on a block level, you can just update that one block, but then at the end of the page, you can just add more stuff, because those will be seen separately. So also, when we talk about structured data, one very popular app now is Tana, which is a mesh between, as I would say, Notion and an outliner tool. Some of our engineers have already been playing with something called in Tana called super tags. There's already, I think, a plugin right now that was released last week that already enables you to create templates based on tags. So that is definitely something that we're also looking into, how to make it easier to structure your notes and then structure your templates, and that way create your own system. So obviously we want to provide more building blocks, like the custom to-do statuses, but a lot can be solved already by enabling more or providing more structured data tools. So we have properties, but then when you create a template with properties and your template changes, maybe you want to add an extra property, you will have to go back to all the instances where you use that template and then manually add a property. Yeah. Whereas in a tool like Tana with the super tags, you can just add a new property and it will appear in all the instances that you called that template. So the property will be added to that structure from the past. Yeah. And that is something that we also want to add, and that the engineers are actually working on, because that makes it so much easier to also do maintenance work on your graph. Because as you use Logseq, as you learn better how to structure your notes, at some point you settle on a structure. But if you've tried a lot of different approaches in one graph, many people just scratch their graph and they start over. That's what many people now have to do. We want to make it easier to let your graph grow with you, so that you don't have to start over, that you don't have to throw away everything that you build up because it was not properly structured. And I think once we incorporate some of those good ideas from other tools, Notion obviously also has its tables. We are working on better table support, which just makes it easier to structure your data, which in turn I think will make it easier to manage your processes, because a process obviously is a defined series of steps. And then if you define that in your own system and you can shape it however you want, I think that can give a lot of powerful tools in the hands of users who know how to use it. And then on the other hand, we want to still make it easy to use. So probably Logseq will ship with some standard templates, some best use cases, or have a template library. Also something that Tana now has just launched. I keep mentioning Tana, but there's a lot of things that we learn from other tools that our users ask for. And it's always a contentious subject, right? It's like, are you copycatting things? We definitely got that criticism. I think sometimes that criticism is fine, but it's also an open source tool. So like you said, if somebody has the coding knowledge and creates a new feature based on another tool, and the code is good and the functionality is good, we will accept that. So it has advantages being so open, because you can create a lot, but then obviously also it becomes a hodgepodge at some point where it's just a lot of features that are maybe not properly integrated. So what we try to do is take a lot of the good ideas, streamline them as much as possible, and then try to fit them into Logseq. So
yeah, doesn't like go through a testing process. Can imagine, for example, that something starts out as a plugin, and at some point goes like, hey, 99% of our users are installing this.
yeah,
Maybe we can make it easier by making it part of the core functionality.
yeah,
And then, of course, we're talking about copying. Of course, you see Logseq having a lot of strong inspiration. I will be putting it mildly for Rome. But that's on its own not bad, as they said, like, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants. You take the ideas that other people have made and refined and say, like, this is a good idea. Why should we make our tool less useful because somebody else had a good idea and shared that with the world? Supertext being a prime example. Before Tana came on the scene, nobody was thinking about that setup. Well, we were thinking, but maybe in an unrefined manner. I mean, I was definitely way before Tana making properties and going, it would be so nice if these properties were easier to fill and more consistent. Prime example being, if I make a template with properties now, the properties don't allow me to autofill themselves.
Yeah.
But Logseq has the functionality. I just have to remove the line and start it with a double colon and then type it in. So at some point, I basically went a step back and I said, like, okay, I don't put the properties in. I just add a small text line under it, say, like, think about these properties, and then I just quickly add those every day, which mimics the same functionality. So it means that even before Tana, that desire was already there. Tana has just shown, like, a good way to implement it.
Yeah.
And now everybody is saying, like, hey, that's a good idea. I'm going to steal it from you, but it's not really, because you still have to build it from scratch. It's asked from by a user base. And I think that it's great because it means that overall speaking, the whole personal knowledge management set grows as a whole.
Yeah. I think also, and because I think this could be a good segue into the question that gets asked a lot is, what makes Logseq different? And maybe I can ask you the question first, because I work at Logseq, and so I'm very biased. What makes it for you that you go with Logseq? You've used Notion, you've used Obsidian, you've used Rome, other tools. What is it for you? Do you think Logseq is where I see where I want to build my brain, like my digital brain for the future? What's it for you?
For me, it's a large part open source, because I am long-time Linux user, engineer. So for me, the whole stat is like super important. But right after that one comes the fact that I'm putting very important data to myself, my thoughts and feelings about things that I've collected, and that data is in text files right next to the app. That means that even if tomorrow it is decided that Logseq is going to become like, I don't know, engulfed by a large company and it's going to be behind a paywall and I'm going to have to pay 50 euros a month to use it, I can still just install the previous version of Logseq, use that, and I have a very high chance that a fork will be made and that the development will continue. So not only are my notes in a format that I can read, because text files I could read back when I was on my first computer on DOS, and I can read it now, and I'm 100% sure that I can still read text files 100 years from now, even though it might be in virtual reality or projected in front of me by my then mobile device. So those two things already make it like a core functionality to use. And then the fact that I can also follow the code and know who's working on it, and that it's like an application that grows and has the community in not just like, oh, we're giving you this and then joyfully jump around it, but more like it works the other way around as well. If somebody has a good idea, like the whiteboarding functionality, and says like, hey, we want to build this, and it's part of the vision, because I've also seen the other way around where people made code that didn't match the vision, and then you have to make the hard choice of telling no, because you don't want to create this Frankenstein's monster that's built from all these separate parts. But the fact that you can, and that you know, and that I can go to GitHub and read and dive into it, is what drew me to Logseq. It's basically the same thing that drew me to Linux, for example, because Linux had this thing that I missed with Windows. Windows had like, you have like a level, you get there, and then it stops, and you can't go any deeper. And then I got to Linux, and then it was like, this goes all the way down. You can go all the way down until you're writing machine language, and you have to fight with Linus Torvalds on your patches that are not good enough. They're never good enough. And with Logseq, I get the same feeling, right? I can go all the way down until I get to the functionality of the application. If I'm going like, why doesn't this work? I can go straight to GitHub, and I can then find the issue that people are talking about and saying like, why, yes or no, they're implementing that, or even dive deeper and read the code itself. Though it's in Clojure, which I don't have any experience with except for the primer that I took to learn how to write advanced queries.
Yeah, the data log. So you started to, like, you discovered the data structure of how Clojure works, but not actually writing Clojure, right?
Yeah. Still need to do like a proper Clojure hello world at some point.
Yeah. It's for me the open source aspect of Logseq. It's a superpower, I feel like, but it's also it's a potential super weakness, because what you said, like that it can become Frankenstein's monster. I feel that we are now trying to find that balance where we are strict on accepting pull requests from the community, so it has to be at a certain documentation level, tests, etc., etc. Luckily, the team is getting also better at that themselves, because stability issues in the past were definitely a big pain point. So we are also learning as we are working as a team. So now we have about 10 engineers, full-time engineers who are paid, who work on the app full-time. And then obviously you have an army of hobby coders who maybe spend a few hours per week hunting some bugs, chiming in on GitHub issues. But it's still, I feel like it's now still mostly team-driven, whereas before it was mostly community-driven when the team was very small. And for the long term, I believe that it's very important that the team has a clear vision, a good way of working, stable releases, tests, release notes, all that stuff for the end user. But then it being open source, and I always had to think about what was it, Open Office, and at some point they started to bundle with other things, and that the community was like, we don't want this. and that they basically forked OpenOffice and it became LibreOffice, I think. And that I also keep mentioning to the community, because not everybody is sure about Logseq, because we give this tool for free. We have a donation system, but it's by no means makes it sustainable. Also because we give most of that money to the community. But I always say, because we are open source, if at some point Logseq as a company disappears, you can still use it. It's a local app. You don't have to use it in the web browser. So you can run it on your local machine. And then if Logseq disappears, the company, there will hopefully be a fork and people will continue working on it. Maybe not with a clear vision as it is we're now developing, but at least it will keep getting security updates and stuff like that. So I think that's it's a strength, but to work well with the community, I think we need to also work more on guidelines, like how do you document something goes for the plugins, but also if you add new features to the core code base. So there's a lot where we can still become better. I think that is one of the main moats that we have as Logseq. Then why Logseq and not other tools? Yeah, again, I think the open source aspect, the community, the plugin system, it makes it just really easy for people who are only a little bit technical to already create more of a custom experience for themselves. Whereas if you have Notion basically, even if you use the app, you do not get to peek underneath the hood. You cannot create something very custom. You would have to use an API and maybe an external service. I saw you recently also tweet about automated backups, for example, because you cannot touch the data directly because it's not local first. I think that's another strength of Logseq. It's local first. It can obviously cause some issues for people who are not allowed to install an app on their enterprise managed laptop. But it's for a lot of other users, it's a lifesaver because nobody is peeking into their notes. And for me, it's one of the reasons that I left Rome as a user, that I didn't trust the team enough that they would not read my notes, because they would say in public, oh yeah, like even though technically we can read your notes, we would never do that. Yeah. But I have no security that nobody would do that. Yeah. Same with Tana. When I look in their privacy policy, it's like there's no guarantee that nobody will peek in my notes. So I am not going to put my deepest secrets, my personal journal, even though probably nobody cares about my personal struggles in life. But it's just a feeling that I think these notes are local. If like the only reason I'm going to lose my notes is when my computer is going to burn, and otherwise I have my notes. So I think that gives a lot of like, to me it brings a calm mind, basically. And I think there's a lot to say. You can say, oh, there's a app, like these apps that are open source, but they still use maybe a cloud service, or they use iCloud Sync. They don't have their own sync service, maybe. I do not like that. And then maybe you have other apps that are closed source, but then they say, yeah, but you can use local files. For me, Logseq is just the perfect combination of community input, customability, safety, privacy. So I think that's why I think Logseq will always have a place in the PKM tool market, even though there are hundreds of tools. Yeah. I still think that Logseq is a unique enough, customizable enough for people to be used for years to come, maybe decades to come. I mean, ultimately, org mode is also still around, even though people want fancy apps. It's still text-driven app that is so popular among very specific type of user, but it's still around and it's still being maintained. And I hope that Logseq will also have that, with also the financial stability, because we offer third-party services like publishing, sync, etc.
One of the things that I like definitely in our connected and hyperactive world is that with Logseq I could get a couple of books and Logseq, take my laptop and go somewhere without internet, and still be able to check out my notes, read stuff, combine things, link things, and then come back and then resync them again with the rest of the systems. That peace of mind that you mentioned, the fact that Logseq notes are on my phone, on the desktop here, my desktop at home, means that even if my house burns down, my notes will be safe on another device.
Yeah.
And the cloud backup, because I'd ever trust just one plan. So this gives me tremendous peace of mind. Yeah. I know people can't read it by default, but I'm also aware enough of security that going that if somebody wants to hack into my computer, I won't make it. Because yes, I can update it, but nobody is good enough or has that kind of money. Like if the NSA wants to get into your computer, they'll have some type of code that I can't patch against yet. So that risk is always there. I wish them lots of luck reading my fanfic. Anyhow, so then those are the things that that I love Logseq for. And of course, there's other local tools, but I love the way of working with the journal. And when it comes to this, like linking my notes, journaling, having one spot, having it local, then in the end, there's only one app that I land on that I can say like, okay, this is where I trust my brain. Hopefully for decades to come, because it's not something that that was easy to build, and I'm not looking forward to transplanting that into another app. No, because it's so much information. But overall, like this is the foundation is very good. As you mentioned, the org mode where the original was based on. This is one of the reasons why I trust Logseq to take all this information in, because I'm like, hey, your foundation is good, you know, and the user interface might be going through that adolescence phase and it needs a shower and a shave, but you know that's possible. The data is not affected by that. Yeah. So I just see something that's like, this is good enough for now. And a good partner of mine always said to begin as you wish to continue. Which was a dating advice she gave me, but it's also part of the apps. The way Logseq is right now, I can work. That is how I want to continue, but I know it will get even better than that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know where Logseq will go exactly in the future, because like I said, we're working on our team vision, which is where we as a team want our product to go. This is something we'll present probably around when this video is released, so because we also want to get feedback from the community. But in the end, it, like you said, it doesn't matter. The foundation, I think the foundation still needs some work also, especially if we want to really make it the stability and the speed and the performance better. But like you said, it's plain text, and then so getting your data out is trivial. I still personally think that it would be nice, and you also mentioned block references. It would be nice if either us or the community creates some tools or even a feature maybe within Logseq that you can export your markdown files better and then retain the block references, for example, in some way. So I still feel like there's some work to do to make interop better. So I know a lot of people use Logseq in combination with Obsidian, but then again, you cannot use the block references, the Logseq block references in Obsidian, or the Obsidian block references in Logseq. In the case of Logseq block references, I think an Obsidian plugin could help. But I think as a company, as a product, that interop should just get a little bit more of attention from our side, that it becomes easier to plug in your data into other tools and just use it immediately. So I think there's still some work to do there, like in the exports. And then obviously once we have the exports functionality improved, hopefully we can also provide better long form exports, or maybe we can provide exports directly to PDF, or what we're already working on, publish something directly to the web and have some kind of download button, like download this markdown file. So there's a lot to come. I think we have almost nothing else to discuss right now.
Oh, we have plenty to discuss, but like the question topics we had were done. I'm looking forward to it. I'm pretty sure we'll have another conversation like this.
For sure.
We might be able to compare what we've recorded today in a year's time, or maybe 3 years' time, to look back and go like, oh, didn't expect it to change this much, or maybe some things just stayed the same because they were perfect to begin with.
Yeah.
We'll see.
We'll see. It was nice. I like this. Just spitballing about the future of Logseq. And then, hopefully some other time we can also do some reveals of features here as well, because I think that would be cool also in this studio to give it a little bit of extra spice to launch a feature, for example.
And hope that everybody found it interesting. And then see you in the next one.